as we talk about building the future of our field, what needs to be at the absolute foundation of that future. And so for that, obviously diversity, equity, inclusion is something that has gotten a lot of general talk, but specifically for the ocean space is something that I think aren't conversations that happen enough. And, thankfully both Rose and Leslie have been doing a lot of work in their own experiences to really put that out there. But we're happy to give that platform here at Seaworthy and really promote that not only for just the general ocean sciences, but for the innovation and solutions we develop. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and real quick do a little deeper dive into what that looks like as far as the industry side and technical side goes. So there's this report that came out about a month ago called the Ocean 100. And this backed up a lot of my own jadedness about the field with the fact that oil and gas primarily make up the majority of the blue economy revenues and opportunities professionally. But in addition to that, defense, where I spent the last 5 years working, is also a major player in this in the blue economy. And so when we think about that as innovation concepts, right, it's easy to say, well, they're not developing the solutions to actually address the problems of our time, like plastics, ocean acidification, climate change, and more. But at the same time, for a diversity point of view, it's a really even bigger problem. These are old industries with old ways of business, and they don't operate on the same timescales that we do when we talk about what needs to happen moving forward. And so, I don't have the perspective from the oil industry, but there was this great write-up on NPR about how pervasive racism and the lack of diversity is in the oil industry field. But I can say from my own time in the defense field, diversity was a major lack, majorly lacking. And these are things that, again, when we talk about this is where the money's at and we need innovation, and they're not only not solving the problems of our time, but they're not even bringing all the players to the table to solve the problems in the first place. And so that's really part of what is part of our considerations as we build the field that we want for the future. And so overall, this notion that ocean science and innovation can't settle for being this byproduct of serving private interest is so important to us. And then it begs the question, where are these solutions going to come from? And obviously that is innovation and entrepreneurship, right? That is really where we're trying to promote. And these are just some startups. I'm sure you've probably heard of the Ocean Cleanup and Ocean Era, formerly Kampachi Farms. These are all different ways that we can build a new system. And that system is more diverse, inclusive, and equitable. And beyond that, and this is just something I love to share, it's really embracing this new systemic change for ocean innovation and not just focusing on serving the silos that currently exist. And well, as we've talked in the past, regeneration's another story, but again, the key thing is the systemic change. And so that really brings us to where Seaworthy comes in, which, as you guys know, we're launching our venture studio later this year, where we really focus on making an inclusive and open opportunity for anyone to become a co-founder or an existing startup to actually get the opportunity to get into our pipeline and grow. And so that's really what we're trying to do. And diversity is embedded in our values as well. And so with that, I want to kick off today's panel and welcome Leslie Townsell as well as Rose Santana. And we're really, really excited to have you both. I'm going to have you guys just give a little more background on each of you and explain what you do and impress everybody, because I love the work you guys are doing. And I've said Rose's picture is just absolutely badass. So with that, Rose, would you like to start with a little intro on you and your background?
Yeah, so my name is Rose Santana. I'm from Dominican Republic. I'm currently a research analyst at Florida International University. I study metal contamination in our aquatic ecosystems, primarily fish behavior. A part of the reason why I study what I study, or I study things that sublethal effects. So I study the effects that the EPA says is safe to be in our environments to try to prove why this is not the case and why we should strive to be better than that. I'm really big on science communication. I'm a firm believer of, if we do the science and we don't tell anyone, did we really do the science? So a big part of what I do is sort of try to integrate the general public and do a lot of citizen science activities to try to give this science back to the people that are mostly dependent on it.
Awesome. Thanks, Rose. Leslie, you want to give your side?
Yeah, so my name is Leslie Townsell. I'm a grad student. I'm currently at University of Georgia, and my research is based on the impact of climate change on oyster aquaculture along the Georgia coast. So I'm looking at the carbonate system, and I'm doing like a lot of marine chemistry to really figure out like how these oysters are being impacted by ocean acidification or coastal acidification, temperature, salinity, alkalinity, and a whole bunch of other smaller characteristics. With this information, I'm actually going to bring it to the oyster farmers in Georgia so that they can get back their economy. Oyster farming used to be one of the biggest economies in Georgia until the early 20th century, when it definitely hit a huge decline. So if we could bring that back to at least even what it like half of what it was before, we could definitely make a huge impact on those marginalized communities along the coastline of Georgia, and really, I guess, help out that economy and really figure out what's going on for us in terms of ocean acidification and coastal acidification, because as you know, a majority of our food comes from the ocean.
And that, there's so many points that oysters can solve. I know they've been proposed here in Biscayne Bay, Rose, to solve some of the pollutant problems we're having down here as well.
They're great filters.
Absolutely, which makes you wonder if you should eat them sometimes, but overall the environmental impact is incredible. So all that being said, we're gonna weave today, themes of DEI and science. It's not just one or the other, and that's really important to us to really balance that focus. And so we have a couple questions already lined up that we're really excited to dive into. So with that, I'm just gonna kick things off. Leslie, I'll throw the first question to you. What does a diverse, equitable, and inclusive field mean to you?
So before I answer that question, I think we actually should define diverse, equitable, and inclusive, because so many people are actually unfamiliar with those terms because they're like the new buzzwords. So I think diversity is including people with various backgrounds, be it race, social, gender, sexual orientation, disability, just to name a few. And then equity is the fair and impartial treatment of these aforementioned groups. And then inclusivity is going to be providing equal access to opportunities and resources to the groups that I previously mentioned. So to answer your question, having a diverse, equitable, and inclusive field means that you're treating people from all backgrounds with the same and providing them with the appropriate resources and opportunities for them to succeed without bias.
Wow, that was textbook. Awesome. Thank you.
That was just beautiful.
Right? Yeah, Rose, I was gonna have you do your interpretation. The bar's been set pretty high. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I can't follow that. I can just echo what Leslie said. I mean, she nailed it.
Awesome. All right. Well, in that case, Leslie, I'm going to have you go second on this next one so Rose has a chance, okay? No, really well said, though. And I think it is so important, and that's part of why we have these conversations is like, when we talk about building up the basics, right? I mean, there's so many, first off, the maritime field itself is one of the oldest fields on the planet, right? And we talk about, innovation, all that, like that's leagues ahead of so much of what's already out there. When we talk about the need for just absolute basics and understanding of key principles, you're hitting the nail on the head, right? We really need to understand these things. So I'm really glad you nailed those definitions. All right, with that, I'm going to move on to our second question then. Rose, what are some of the barriers that exist to enabling diversity, equity, and or inclusivity in the scientific community?
I'm going to say the biggest one I've seen so far is the lack of opportunity. Like Leslie said, the opportunities aren't equal to everybody when you look at diversity and inclusivity, just because of the fact that, especially in marine science, there's this sort of unspoken rule for some reason that undergraduate students especially should and are able to work for free. And I know so many students who just were not able to, continue their careers within this field because they just could not afford to work or volunteer for free in a lab for semesters long. They couldn't get internships because they didn't have time to stay after class and get those glowing letters of recommendation just because they had other stuff to do. And I think it's a very big issue. And I'm going to bring it back to socioeconomic status. It's one of those things where I'm like, I'm not looking at black, white, yellow, green, whatever it is that you want to look at. I'm looking at it's poor versus rich, and unfortunately marginalized communities tend to fall under that spectrum of being on the lower socioeconomic statuses. It's just they cannot afford to do it. I mean, I'm Hispanic. I know so many people whose parents, you know, are first generation or they're first generation Americans, and they're like, well, I'm going to be a doctor because I need to make a lot of money. And I just, you know, I have to work 2 jobs. I know people like friends of mine who had to quit school to take care of their parents, you know, and it's really sad when you look at it. And then it's just the expectation. It's kind of like, well, if you want to be a scientist, you have to go to grad school. To get into grad school, you have to get experience. You have to work for free. And not everybody can follow that linear path. And I think that's one of the biggest issues we've seen. I mean, I acknowledge my own purpose in this. I had a family who was like, listen, go work your minimum wage job, girl, if that's what's going to get you your experience to get into grad school. You know, not everybody, especially when you look at it like opportunities like REUs, which are research experience for undergraduates, which are designed primarily to offer students an opportunity to get paid to do research in the summer. The system's broken fundamentally. I know students who have done 4 REUs, 3 REUs summer back to back to back, when these are opportunities that should be given to students who haven't gotten any research experience. It does you no good to do 4 of these if there's another person who's just as passionate who just hasn't gotten the chance to be able to do research.
And that's a great point on so many levels. I mean, first off, it's the way academics works as a system, which is one issue in itself, right? And we talk about bureaucracy and that's a whole nother can of worms, but and then on the other side, you know, it is just talking about the finances and overall accessibility of those opportunities. I mean, I related it from the industry side, right? I mean, even if you actually want to do ocean impact work, right? Everything, as I mentioned, is oil and gas and defense as an engineer. And it's really, it's somewhat discouraging, right? To say I'm passionate about something, and yet the opportunities are either sell out or sell yourself short when it comes to what you can get paid. and then that doesn't even factor in where you're coming from, where if you're already at a disadvantage, these are things that you can't afford to take, right? So it's an interesting problem on a number of levels. Leslie, curious to hear your thoughts on the question as well.
I mean, Rose, you definitely hit the nail on the head right there. So I can do a little bit of piggybacking. In academia, we have a huge problem of gatekeeping, and those gatekeepers are the good old boys. So they essentially do favors for those who fit their aesthetic. And right now, as you can see what the aesthetic clearly is. There are not marginalized communities very prevalent in the marine science field. And for my work, Rose's work, that's what we're working so hard to change right now. And then there's another whole publisher perish. It costs so much money to publish, hundreds to thousands of dollars to get into a good journal to publish. And a lot of these times, it's really hard to get those scholarships or the funding to written in for your publishing. And so people are starting to have to pay out of pocket for it. And these marginalized communities, they cannot afford to pay thousands of dollars to get one article in a journal that's behind a paywall that their friends and family can't officially read through the journal site because you have to pay $40 for access. These paywalls. Well, yeah, the mere cost of publishing is just a hindrance and a turnoff to a lot of people who can't afford it. And then what Rose said, these unpaid internships, the volunteer work, a lot of people are living paycheck to paycheck. We're now in a pandemic where so many people have lost their jobs and lost so much more than just their jobs. And if we continue, you really have to start paying people what they're worth, because eventually you're going to end up with a community of people who are so passionate about the work but don't have the experience. And then you end up with the people who have the experience and are just in the field because, they had those opportunities. What Rose said was hitting the nail on the head, essentially.
And it's an interesting point when you're talking about making people get paid what they're worth, though, because right, I love to harp on capitalism because it's just like, well, what's the competition, right, to drive them to actually get paid, right? And the point is, if we're existing in this tunnel vision of it's public sector or academia well, competing with public sector for salaries isn't exactly a high bar. So it's really about how do we create these alternative paths to actually say, oh, I can actually get paid if I went this way, like innovation and entrepreneurship, because right now the only other opportunity is private industry, which is, as we know, pretty much selling out. So it is this interesting question of like, if you actually want to do the things, the impactful work that you're passionate about, do you accept the fact that you'll never make more than X amount of dollars a year, right? And that's its own paywall in itself, essentially. Yeah, it's great points. All right, well, moving right along. What are some? I'm going to throw it back to you, Rose. What are some ways DEI considerations and ocean or climate science must work together for a green and just future?
I mean, I'm going to take a little bit of an alternative route here, and I say bring it back to the communities that are most impacted by it. I was lucky enough to do, research in the Arctic 2 summers ago in 2019, and we had a chance to get to know the indigenous communities, and these are the communities that are like, being impacted by climate change every year. And these are the communities that have the least amount of support, and they get the least amount of backing, even scientific backing, where scientists will come in, do research and, their homes and then just leave and never tell them what it is. I think a very big thing is that scientists or, any organization in general needs to bring their knowledge on whatever they find back to the communities that are affected by it. I mean, like I said, I'm from Dominican Republic. We see it all the time where people will come to Dominican Republic, do research on, how many ever, environmental issues, and then leave and never tell the people what it is. So we're all kind of just sitting there like, well, what did you find out? What can we do? So the fact that the communities are never being told, what was found and how they can make an impact and what they need to do to make it better, I think is a very big issue. And it's, again, gatekeeping this, where it's, if you're privileged enough to work on this, you're privileged enough to have the knowledge. But if you don't, you're kind of just sitting there like, well, the everyday person's just like, what the heck do I do?
And actually, a really interesting point from the regenerative perspective. One of the things that I keep hearing as I've immersed myself in the regenerative community is the fact that we're actually leaning on indigenous practices to do a lot of the things to fight climate change and to restore the environment, right? They've been around a lot longer than a lot of the colonized communities. And so as a result, they have practices that have stood the test of time and can actually help heal the planet that we've arguably exploited. And so it's an interesting thing where you're starting to see, as we develop these new quote unquote innovations, it's actually going a lot back to basics of what the expertise these populations have to actually offer. And so it's an interesting flip of the script when we talk about inclusivity, where it's actually even more advantageous to focus on that as well.
Right, like I always think about it. Like for me, we had a little inside joke when we were up there, and I was like, you guys are like the OG Arctic biologists, and you guys are the OG wildlife biologists. And we look at all of the things they've had. I was like, there's a reason why these communities probably have the lowest carbon footprint there is in the planet, and they're fine, and they've been fine for thousands of years. Why are we not taking notes from them? They clearly figured it out. Just saying.
Yeah, you don't need a PhD for that.
Apparently not.
All right, Leslie, and bringing it back to the question, Leslie, how about you? So just a refresher, the question is, what are some ways DEI considerations and ocean or climate science must work together for a green and just future?
So I guess when you think about it, we're talking a little bit about climate equity. And so you have to bring in that first definition of equity that I used before. So, and add it to climate. So essentially it would be protection from all climate related instances, regardless of your background. So, and I mentioned those backgrounds earlier. So to figure out how DEI and climate equity can actually work together, it leads us to climate justice, which frames climate change as a social and a political issue, not just an environmental issue. So once we wrap our heads around the fact that, we're affected socially and we're affected politically and not just environmentally, I think that's when we can really start to enact change. And I guess create a blue and just future and economic opportunities for those who are marginalized. So if you think about it, like an example that I thought of, Flint, their water. Why? It's been how many years now, and we're still having problems with the Flint water supply. Flint is a predominantly Black community. If this was in another community, do you think it would have taken this long to fix their water? Think about Texas. Those who were most affected by the blackouts were in marginalized communities, Black and brown people in housing areas. And we have to think of it as a social and a political issue in order to fix it. We have to create these bills and these policy changes in order to get a blue and just future.
Great point. And I love the fact that you brought up Texas as a great recent example, right? I mean, when we think about, even when we talk about developing the infrastructure to support, populations as we continue to, take on more and more land as a population, right? We have to think about ways that we're not only just building this regenerative infrastructure for the sake of the environment, but the people that we're serving and making it equitable and accessible. So absolutely, it's an interesting case study with Texas now on top of that. And one other thing I want to add as far as, the climate equity portion goes here in Miami, and Rose, I'm sure you can chime in on this as well, right? Little Haiti is actually the high ground in Miami. And what's interesting is all the low-lying ground is the prime beach development areas. And so now as they're realizing, sea levels are rising and they're going to be underwater in the next few decades, all of a sudden you're seeing major gentrification push happen in Little Haiti. It's like its own case study in climate gentrification, what's happening right now. And there's been this big development effort right now. I think it's called, Rose, maybe it's Magic City or Magic Innovation District, one or the other. But bottom line, there's just this major push to start development over there, especially now that there's even more momentum with folks from Silicon Valley coming into town. And so there's an interesting issue happening where we're trying to preserve, right, the local culture, history, and obviously more importantly, keep people in their homes. And how that's all going to pan out is definitely in local Miami history going to be interesting to watch. So go ahead, Rose.
Right, it's interesting that you bring that up, because here in South Florida we have Little Haiti, we have Hialeah, Opa-locka. Those are all, Hialeah or Opa-locka especially, are predominantly Hispanic neighborhoods. They've been treated as predominantly Hispanic neighborhoods. They're not the greatest neighborhoods, but recently, within the last couple of years, we've seen an increase in property prices in that. So the same people who have lived in these in these areas for decades can now no longer afford to buy homes in these areas, because there's a giant push coming in from like South Beach in the Miami area to sort of urbanize the area. Or like, really, like, people who have lived here all their lives can now no longer afford to live here because you guys are trying to push more towards areas that are friendlier because the rest of Miami is underwater.
Yeah, it's the impact of climate change on South Florida, as far as not only how it's going to alter our our overall ecosystem, but how it's going to alter, the community, underrepresented, underserved communities. We're going to be a very much either example of what not to do or have the example to lead. And I think that's very much happening right now. Which leads us to our next question, which I'm going to throw to you, Leslie. How might leadership in the scientific community and/or private sector take tangible steps to empower a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive community/industry?
Throw out all the norms. That's the first thing that needs to happen. You need to hire more BIPOC. And learn how to retain them. You want to give them safe spaces to work in. Nobody wants to come to work and be verbally abused, or just because of the color of their skin or their religion or their gender or their sexual orientation or anything like that. And you have to pay them. Nobody wants to come to work and feel undervalued and feel like they can go to another job that might be run by somebody that looks like them, who's willing to pay them what they're actually worth. Stop asking BIPOC to do stuff for free. Everybody has bills to pay. And we already traditionally get paid less. So Black men get paid less. Black women get paid even more less. So that's a huge problem. Why isn't everybody on the same, like, I don't even want to get into the gender pay scale right now, so let me not even go there.
Well, I'll back up the gender issue though. There's a great report I highly recommend if you want to familiarize yourself with the ocean tech and innovation scene. It's created by Catapult Ocean. It's called the Blue World Perspective, and they just released the last edition in November. And basically, they break down at least the gender diversity of founders for ocean startups. And right now, it's only 2 out of 10 founders are female, which is up from 1 out of 10 they found in 2019. So a little encouraging, but still very, very obviously off balance. So it's really, and before we even factor in, right, the racial and potential biases out there, right, just even as women in the field, it's hard enough as is to get that equal level of representation. So 100% feel you there. Rose, same question for you.
I mean, yes, that, whenever you bring something like that into the table. I mean, I personally experienced it where we've been in a lab, and this is research I've been doing for the last 3 years. And someone asked, like, one of my male colleagues, like, first they asked me, I gave them a response, and they turned, just looked me straight in the eye, turned to my male colleague, and then asked him the exact same question, because apparently I can't answer it. And he's like, well, you got to defer to her on this one, because this is her project and this is what she works on. I have no clue. And you constantly feel like you don't belong in the room. But again, I'm going to bring it back to the communities that are most impacted by it. Like, go out to the communities that are being affected by the science that you're researching or that you're trying to do. Ask them how they feel about it. Ask them what they've seen. Try to include that in the research that you're doing, because at the end of the day, you're here as a scientist and you're seeing it for whatever small portions of time. The communities that are living it and breathing it every day know what it is. We see it here in South Florida with sea level rise, where people will come in and they'll try to tell the communities about sea level rise. Meanwhile, the communities whose houses and cars are underwater are like, yeah, dude, we know. We want answers and we want solutions. So let's bring it back to the communities. Try to include the communities in that, even something as simple as doing simplified or, non-jargon infographics or informational things that people can spread around the communities and people can learn from that will go a long way, because at the end of the day, those are the same communities that will have an issue or will have a hand in, the policies that are going to go towards regulating whatever the issue is.
Yeah. And when we talk about inclusivity by design, right, that isn't just, a business perspective. That's definitely just as well for academics and research. And so I love going back to the point that was raised earlier, just as far as like, you do research that can benefit an area, right? And feed it back to them, right? Help those communities, right? I mean, it goes from both ends as far as just the education and power component, as well as the actual serving what you've actually done for the work to those communities that you've impacted. So great points all around. And honestly, that transitions perfectly to our next question. Which is, how can innovators and entrepreneurs embed DEI considerations in the businesses and solutions that they build? Leslie, I'll throw it back to you.
So again, you need to hire a diverse workforce. You need to make sure you're hiring with no biases. So that might mean your hiring managers are diverse, so that can help you kind of go against your natural biases. And really filter out good employees who are diverse, who will bring the same to the company as, somebody that might look like the CEO. So yeah, and then again, you always want to have a safe space for people of color, because all too often we're in these workplaces and we're just getting assaulted left and right. Like similar to what Rose said about, some sitting at the table and you're either interrupted or overlooked, or just nobody pays attention to you when you're the actual expert in the room. And it's just like, hi, hello, that's why you hired me. So it's, why am I even here if you're not going to listen to me or if you're going to talk over me? So.
Yeah, no, I witnessed in my last job working with the Navy some serious mansplaining happening. So it's, yeah, I know. And honestly, I'm not going to say her name, keep her anonymous, but like, this woman who was on our team literally got discouraged and left the team because of that level of bias against her. And Oh, I felt like one of the only people in the room standing by her, but like, it's so prevalent, and people want to think that these things are still, things from the 1800s, but it's still prevalent in highly educated individuals, right? Like, doesn't matter, PhD doesn't matter if they're biased. And so I think it's really important to understand that, these may be basic things. I mean, I'm an engineer, and engineers are book smart, not necessarily street smart, right? Like, it may be basic things, but these are really, really critical things that we continue to have to, beat into people's heads until they get it. Rose, getting back to you, sorry if I tangent a little too much, but my own frustrations. The Rose, same question for you. How can innovators and entrepreneurs embed DEI considerations in the businesses and solutions they build?
I think a big part of it is taking in account socioeconomic statuses of whatever solutions they're trying to come up with, as well as actually getting to the root of the problem. There's many people who will try to, create a solution. It's like, okay, well, this is basically nipping it, like 10 steps in versus at the very beginning, which people tend to forget a lot of times. We all have these grand ideas, like especially if you look at it now, a perfect example is like plastics, and everybody's like, well, reusable straws and reusable bags, and have all of these items instead of actually going back to the giant corporations. It's like people spend so much time like arguing with each other whether this straw is necessary and this straw is necessary. Don't get me wrong, it's great that everybody's trying to do their part, but why aren't we all collectively looking at the big guys who are causing most of the issues? So I think even when coming up with the solutions, it's like try to find the root of the issue instead of trying to fight it halfway through, because you're just fighting an uphill battle. I mean, for people mansplaining things to, like Leslie, I've taken over 500 water samples, okay? I had someone try to mansplain how to take a water sample to me after they've done it twice. And I was just like, I get paid $10 an hour to do this, okay? At least I know what I'm doing.
I think I didn't realize we'd be venting so much today, but I love it. No, and it's so true. Again, it's just, when it comes to just the basic, right, respect for people knowing what they know, right, and having the background they do, it's so interesting when, other people come in with their biases and basically trying to negate, sometimes years of expertise. And, when we talk about, and this is the piece I was going to jump on before, systemic change, right? We're not just talking about developing, a better straw, right? We're talking about how can we actually drive the change that we need to see to actually, if these major corporations don't change, they're going to go out of business, right? Because we're developing the solutions that actually people want, right? And so it's the interesting sway of capitalism where you say, if we can develop something not just better on a small scale mousetrap level, but as an actual system of how do we develop an overall better, plastic alternative, right? Then we can really actually change the system. So that's part of the regenerative piece as well, which encourage everyone to do some homework on that. But that's for another panel. With that, I'm going to lead into our last question. So if you haven't put your question in the chat for the Q&A, please be sure to get those in because we only got one more question. So, but this is a good one. I always save this one for last because it's my favorite. What advice do you have for people who may come from underserved or underrepresented communities who want to get into the ocean sciences or climate sciences and may not even have a scientific background? I'll throw it back to you, Leslie.
Don't give up. The road is going to be hard at first, and it's probably going to be hard for a really long time, but you are going to eventually see the light at the end of the tunnel. And if this is your passion, just keep on pushing. Don't ever stop wanting for it. Just keep on going towards it. Lean on your support system because, like I said, it's going to get hard. And I actually need to give a special shout out to my Spelman sisters right now because I see a lot of you guys out here. They are my support system. Like those 5 years of college, yes, I said 5. I would not have made, it probably would have been more than 5 if I didn't have these wonderful ladies. You're gonna experience imposter syndrome. And if you don't have a support system to hold you up when you fall down, that imposter syndrome is going to take over. So make sure you find somebody you trust, a group of people that you trust that can get you through that imposter syndrome. And then lastly, I cannot express how important it is to have a mentor that looks like you. I don't know what I was doing with before before I met my mentor, honestly. I think I was just kind of floating through life, and she has honestly put me on the most incredible path, and she has, you know, given me some really awesome opportunities. And I mean, my advisor is incredible. And my mentor is just as incredible, and she's not working with me in an academic capacity. She's not on my committee. She's just a human. Like, me and her can text at 2:00 in the morning, and she just understands. Like, she gets where I'm coming from because she came up through this system, so she can help me out. So that imposter syndrome, if I know I can't go to my Spelman sister about this, I know that I can go to my mentor about it. So.
And I'm actually going to back that up from the other side. You know, when it comes to what people can do as allies, right, to communities of color, right? For me, I've been able to actually get mentors who have a diversity of backgrounds, right? And that's been so critical to me, is actually being able to get diverse opinions and get people that don't look like me specifically to give me advice and helping to build what we've been doing for Seaworthy. And so that's something, just as far as on our end, as people who may not be underrepresented, to actually have these diverse opinions built into how we operate, and something really critical for us to be mindful of and inclusive of as we find our mentors as well. Rose, same question for you.
So Leslie, I feel like, covered the emotional aspect of that question, or the emotional answer of that. So I'm going to take it back a little bit to a more hands-on approach, what these people can do to get involved in ocean sciences. I might be biased because I do a lot of community or citizen science outreach programs. Try to find a citizen science program that's, operating around you. Oftentimes start one yourself if you don't know. A lot of these organizations will provide you with the training necessary. I do a lot of project with Florida Sea Fan, where we will, we're snorkelers and we're divers, and we go out. I've organized groups of, people who have never been involved in science at all. And we'll go out and we'll survey local coral reefs, and we'll assess the health of those. I've taken students out during, or even regular people. I had someone's grandma come out with us, not too long ago, where we went out and we took water samples of flooded streets in Miami, and, we brought those back to the university and we analyzed the data. It's ways that everybody can get involved. You don't have to have a scientific background. A lot of the times, the people who are working on these, because they're so passionate about the science that's being done, will sit there and hold your hand and walk you through step by step till you understand it. And we love it. So a very big thing is, I encourage everybody to get involved in citizen science community, events, just to sort of get your toes wet and learn about what's happening and be able to give back to that. And it's a way for us, the scientists, to be able to give back to the communities, talk to you about what the heck it is that we're doing. Because you see us in boots out here taking water samples, and you're like, what are those weirdos doing? That's what we're doing.
We actually had a panel on citizen science this past fall. One of my advisor actually for UM is Keen Haywood. He teaches the class on it. And, I love citizen science just as a concept for leading inclusivity in the sciences, right? It's making it accessible to people who don't even necessarily have a scientific background, let alone wherever people come from. Right. So love that answer, Rose. Really, really great point.
We have
with that, we're going to move on.
Girl and a grandma in the same group.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was like, I'm the idiot here. You guys go.
Yeah. I mean, if you get to brag that your grandma's great at water sampling, I'm jealous, All right. So with that, we're going to move on to the Q&A. The first question I see is from Tony. And Tony, are you okay to unmute, or I'm happy to read your question for you if not.
Yes, sure. Hey, how are y'all? Thank you for this. I appreciate it very much. So to me, it's really trying to envision what success looks like. So I wonder if you, and I like to say look and feels like, because I feel like it's sort of like, it needs to almost sort of disappear in the background, and we need to be comfortable with the change. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on what success looks like, and then if you have any specific ideas for kind of actions or milestones that we can set to sort of set our pathway, our progress toward that.
I'll start. So I think incorporating DEI with ocean science and climate science, for me, success would be coming into the workplace and really seeing it as a true melting pot. And everybody kind of just including everybody in decision making, extreme transparency, even pay scale for everybody. I think I would have to say that's what success would probably look and feel like for me. So some action items and milestones that, you know, could move us forward. Like I said before, we need to learn how to hire and retain BIPOC. That is probably one of the first steps. Throwing out the norms, getting rid of your biases, and hiring and learning how to retain them. So yeah.
Rose, did you have anything you wanted to add, or I can jump to the next question if not?
Just a little tidbit. It's, for me personally, success is just when whatever project it is, whether that's academia, industry, you know, entrepreneurship, you take your whatever it is that you're trying to solve, you look at it from every perspective, who's involved in it, who's being affected by it, who would have the most to gain, and you get everybody's perspective in it, just to make sure that there are no biases here. I mean, we're all guilty of it, whether we, you know, admit it or not. Sometimes we have our own tunnel vision and we focus on one thing and we forget to see the 10 other solutions that, you know, could be presented, just because we're like, our way is the right way and I'm not going to hear that I'm wrong. You know, by getting everybody's opinion into it, it can get messy, but it's a very good way to at least incorporate something from every solution to come up with that one grand solution that it is that we're looking for.
Absolutely. And that's, I have to say, the collective piece, right? Had to. All right. With that, Christina, would you like to unmute to ask your question?
Hi there. Thanks, Leslie and Rose, for your time to provide us with these insights. My question is that oftentimes many of the folks coming to a Zoom like this or a professional development opportunity on justice, equality, equity, inclusion, diversity already kind of get it to some degree. So how can we expand to bring in BIPOC? Well, how can we as BIPOC or allies expand the conversation in our workplace to bring in some of the worst offenders, the people who don't get it at all yet? For example, do we ask every cis white male or female here to go back and bring a friend to the next professional development opportunity, or any other ideas similar to that?
Sadly, I think training can only go so far. If you go to training and your heart is not in it, you won't get anything out of it. They have to have some sort of internal change within them, and how that happens, that is not a question that I can answer. Yeah, I don't know, Rose. What do you think, Rose?
Whew. We're getting into the existential questions here. It's hard, because if it's really someone who just does not want to learn or does not care, they're not going to. You know, you can beat them with the brick and they're still gonna be like, no. It's kind of hard. I want to say that I'm going to give everybody the benefit of the doubt, and instead of just, you know, bombarding them with, hey, you should do this because this is good for this, I usually open it up to a conversation. You tell me why you feel a certain way, I'll tell you why I feel a certain way, and let's try to meet somewhere in the middle, with it being reasonable, of course. You know, if you're out here just being blatantly racist or sexist, then, you know, eat dirt. But it's sort of bringing it up to a conversation where everybody feels like, you know, they're being heard and they're being validated, and we can try to get to the root of the problem. I like to believe that it shouldn't be an us versus them issue. It should just be an us issue. You know, this affects all of us. So open conversations instead of like trying to stonewall things and feel like you're being attacked. Just be open to hearing criticism.
I'm actually going to tie this back to something we had discussed earlier, which is the individual responsibility piece versus the systemic piece, right? Whether it's plastic straws or, you know, bringing people in, right? When we talk about, you know, of course, the worst offenders are going to be difficult minds to change, but it's also the system that perpetuates that, right? It's the system that enables them to act the way they do and to be as you know, ignorant as they are. And so the point is, right, how do we at the same time create a system that maybe not filters them out, but at least forces them to have an open mind, right? And I don't necessarily have all the answers on that, but just from a systemic level, right, when it comes to the way we build our organizations, right, and design things, Seaworthy, as I mentioned, has literally built this into our values, right? And we say, if you are on board and you're working with us, this is something that you value. This is not, if that's the way you are, you're not a part of our organization, right? So it's establishing these as ground rule expectations for as you build organizations and as you build companies, and actually really ties back into where we started with talking about the systemic problem of the fact that oil and gas and defense are the largest players in the industry right now, and at the same time, right, maintaining those old schools of thought. So I love bringing things full circle. Leslie, did you have something you wanted to add? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, I was just gonna echo what Rose said about oh my gosh, I lost it. It's okay.
Sorry, I found an opportunity to bring it all together. All right, Stephanie, I saw you had a great question.
Yeah, and thank you for everyone for all those questions. Really great answers. I was wondering, what is the best way to be a better ally, I guess? I mean, there's probably a lot of ways. And like examples of times where something could have gone differently if people had been better allies, or things they could have done differently.
I think speaking up is really big. So if you see somebody being treated unfairly, say something. If you see them being harassed, say something. Like it's better to speak up than to sit there silently. If they're not in a room with you and you think that it's a disservice to them that they're not in that room, pull up a chair at that table in that room and give it to them, or give them your chair in the room. Like, give them the opportunity, the same opportunities that you've been afforded, especially if you think that they're more than qualified to be in a room that they're not in.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, Rose, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, opportunity. I mean, I've been one of the people that has benefited from that. I was a teeny tiny baby scientist, first year of college, and someone, I joked about coming to work with someone, and they're like, "Are you serious? Because I need help." And I had no experience whatsoever, and then I went to go work with her, and now I've had 4 years of experience working on different things at a lab, and I've sort of turned around and done the same thing. So I purposely now, whenever I'm hiring someone, I go through everything and interview everyone and look for the person with the least amount of experience that shows passion, because I don't know what the reason is for them not having any paid experiences. So now I purposely go for those people. So it's just creating those opportunities for people down the line. And I think, again, it boils down to, socioeconomic status. Those are the people that are very dependent on these opportunities, and then they don't get them, because of GPA, because of testing, research experience, no volunteership experience. So just trying to bridge that gap of being like, hey, if you're passionate about something and you want to come work, or you want to work on this, I'm willing to give you a shot. It doesn't matter if, systemically you are not considered the most viable option.
Yeah, I really have to agree with Rose on that one. Boiling it down to what she said, the socioeconomic status, a lot of the times it's the people who have, like, they're living paycheck to paycheck and they can't afford to move their full-time job down to part-time just so they can do part-time volunteer work in the lab while being a full-time student and a part-time worker somewhere. Like, they're dependent on that that money from that full-time job. So when you see those people and you're just like, well, I see that you worked all through college and you have no other experience, that should trigger something like, okay, maybe they couldn't afford that, and maybe like they're showing just as much passion. Like, let me interview them and see if they've applied to different opportunities and just haven't been given one yet. So that's really big.
All right, we got time for one last question, and then I have a little presentation to end things. Tom, would you like to unmute to ask your question?
Sure. Thanks, Daniel. And thank you, Rose and Leslie, for your time and and your great insights. It's really been helpful for me. I entered academia as a freshman and never left, so I may be part of the problem. I've been a program director, I've been a research director, and I do think there's some implicit bias, systematic bias in the entire research hierarchy and network, and starting at the very, very top. And so my question is, if you were in front of the NSF program director, what would you tell them needs to change to improve DEI in marine science and engineering? What can they do to really push equity?
I mean, can I grab this one at the very root? I mean, the whole reason why I started my social media and my science communication stuff is to sort of document my rise through the entire system, starting from an undergraduate, all the way to wherever the heck I land in the future. And a very big thing is just there's a lack of opportunities for everybody. There, we see all these great things, once you reach the postdoc level, once you even the graduate level is a little bit shaky, but like scientists are made. They're not just born. They don't just, come out of the womb with a PhD. And if you don't offer all of your students that fundamental training to be able to succeed, even just, at the high school or the undergraduate level, you're never going to have that equity. As a university student, I always hear about, targeting students, once they're trying, once they're in university, once they're an undergraduate, or once they're, in a graduate program, you need to target it at a much younger level. Try to target the students at, a middle school level, put them on the path to sciences to try to retain them later on. It's easier to retain them once they're passionate and once they know it is an option for them. I've spoken to so many middle school students who are like, I didn't even know this was an option. I thought, marine science was just, you train dolphins. I didn't realize this was an actual career. So it's like trying to target them at a younger level to actually show them the opportunities that are out there, but also pushes more of them into the field that we can then try to retain later on. Leslie?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Rose on that one, because I mean, marine science was fun, going to aquariums, all that stuff was fun, but I didn't realize that I could actually make it a career until my 4th year in college. And my friends can attest to this, when I decided to not apply to med school and I decided to take my GRE instead. And it was just, everything was back to back to back. I did not get into grad school my first go round, and that's okay, because I mean, it happens, that's life. But had I known that this, like, marine science was an actual career that I could pursue, and I didn't have to be a doctor or didn't have to be a lawyer or something like that, then I think I definitely would have, it would have been easier to benefit from it. So I took a marine biology course in high school, but I mean, I thought that was essentially it. I was going to be what my high school science teacher was. And I was just like, I don't want to teach high school. That's not for me. And then I realized, like, I started volunteering at the Georgia Aquarium, and my eyes just got open to so much stuff and like life underwater. And I started understanding it in a more scientific way. I even did some of my undergraduate research on, amoebas living in water. And so it was just like, okay, one thing led to another. And that's when the decision was kind of made for me. But yeah, I would have definitely benefited more had I known that this was definitely a career path that I could have taken.
And then, right, and for NSF, for example, create opportunities, give universities grants to be able to hire students to actually do research throughout the semesters. It's such a simple thing at my university. I pushed and pushed and pushed, and we finally created a fellowship that gave like 20 students opportunities to do independent research throughout the semester for 2 semesters each. Opportunities like that are going to make sure that people get the experience that they need to be able to succeed in grad school and beyond that.
Yeah, that's huge. Opportunities is, yeah.
And that's a perfect segue to my outro. But before we do that, I just want to take a moment to thank Rose and Leslie. This has been an incredible panel. Really, really enjoyed having you guys here, and I think this discussion went even better than I already had hoped. It really, really was so much fun getting to talk to you guys, and I really also want to say great questions, guys. Really, these are some of the best questions we've had so far in any of our panels. So great job all around. With that, I do want to highlight just real quick a little bit on Seaworthy's end, how we're actually really acting on this and creating tangible inclusivity and making accessible opportunities that was so beautifully highlighted in that last question. So you guys can learn more on our website. I'm not going to go through the full model of what we do, but basically, how we work is we have our venture studio, which we co-create startups and crowdsource existing startups as well through our pitch competition. And so we do create these things we call our collective ocean innovation pipelines that really democratizes the opportunity and diversifies this interdisciplinary ocean impact, innovation, and entrepreneurship. And so we're really working to catalyze that systemic change that we've talked about to actually empower current and aspiring entrepreneurs to overcome these industry silos and drive that development of a regenerative blue economy that's actually solving and not just mitigating the ocean's greatest problems. And so how we're doing that is our targeted opportunities for sea change. And so these are the 6 areas that we're looking to really offer any of you guys to become a co-founder of a startup leading impact in one of these areas. And the cool thing about this is that each individually has a great opportunity for impact, but as a collective system have a much even greater potential. And so we're looking to bring on 3 co-founders per startup. So 18 total co-founders brought on by this summer. So if you want to get involved, literally no prerequisites, go on our website. It's the opportunities for sea change at the top as soon as you go on seaworthycollective.com and you can apply. And just a real quick kind of overview of how that all works. Again, we bring together our community through panels and workshops just like this, feed everyone into our venture studio where we co-create our startups, bring in existing startups through a pitch competition, and then finally have the opportunity to get involved in an incubator accelerator to actually grow those businesses. And just to really tie together where we all started and really our vision for this future, which if you haven't heard of the Ocean Decade, it's really what the UN is promoting for the next 10 years of building ocean solutions. This is really our vision for it, which revolves around so much of what we've said today, as far as making it collaborative, inclusive, accessible, and diverse, as well as interdisciplinary and embracing failure as a tool in the innovation mindset, as well as creating these democratized opportunities and overall collectivity. So one last time, I want to thank you again, Rose and Leslie. And if you want to get involved with us, there's our information for our website. And otherwise, Julie should be posting all the links in the chat. This is all of our stuff for our social media as well. I want to thank everyone again today for coming. It's been awesome getting to speak with Rose and Leslie. And we look forward to having you guys for another panel soon. Thanks so much. And yep, everyone can see in the chat Rose and Leslie's Instagram and information's there as well. So thank you all again so much, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye, guys.
Thank you, guys.
See you guys.